Okay, I'm back.
I remember Unicorn being a thing, and that's it.
Hello. Sorry, what did I miss?
I took the time to go on a Gundam tangent for a little while.
Okay.
We're warming up to the Evangelion. What I can only assume is going to be a shitfest later on. So there's a 50-50 chance that this will spawn a sister podcast that's just about giant robots. I'm not sure outside of Evangelion how much I know, but yeah, Gundam Wing is one. That one hits me the hardest next to Evangelion. It's like
I guess nobody was a Big O fan, where it was Big Robots meets Batman.
I liked it visually, but I don't think I ever saw any episodes. I remember it. I liked Big O because like, hey, it's Big O, and my name starts with O, so I guess I'm the Big O. I tried to make that work, but it didn't stick around. What was the Game of Thrones quote again? We don't choose our own names or anything, something like that.
I have no idea.
It's like this cool old lady, and she's called the Queen of Thrones or whatever, and someone mentions it, and she's like, well, I didn't choose that shit. That shit chose me. But in a cooler game.
Like you don't choose your name chooses you?
Yeah, but in a very cooler Game of Thrones quote kind of writing way than a...
I don't know. I've never watched Game of Thrones. Sorry.
The quote used to be good. Yeah, no, I gave up on it.
I'll tell you, Game of Thrones, there's only one good season, and that is season 8. Just watch that one. You'll love it, Chris.
Just watch season 8.
Just season 8. It's the last season. That's all you need.
Oh, yeah, no context. Just context makes it worse.
Is that the one that like everyone told me was like made it bad and they hated the ending and that series, season?
that's the season. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I mean, as long as you don't know that there's anything so much better before that, you're probably good.
Okay. That's good logic to it.
I caved in and let Mulele spoil it for me, and have since then watched an essay of someone explaining why it's horrible. And now my wife is like, oh, we should get back to Game of Thrones. I'm like,
You go ahead, honey. I'm going to be here.
I'll wait in the car.
All right. Anyway, you were mentioning that...
Welcome back to the Getting Off Topic podcast, because let's face it, it's what we do.
This is the attack of Tokyo Comic Attack. We attack comics in a way that makes you think about how you process things, as well as how the world processes it.
And honestly, if you're not here for our bullshit, then what are you here for?
Wow. Hopefully to learn something from us, I guess.
Yeah, but no.
You were mentioning Urasawa Naoki's Astro Boy.
I was thinking of backtracking even further, but yeah, sure. But you haven't read that one, or?
Let me just make sure I'm on the same page as you. Are you talking about Pluto?
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. I'm on the same page now. I saw Pluto, and I thought it was a homage to the work. I didn't know that it was a remake.
No, so basically there's Astro Boy is the series about Astro Boy, and one of the arcs is called The Greatest Robot in the World, I think. That's the English name of it anyway. And they kind of took that arc, which is one of the best ones, I believe. Mm-hmm. I want to say personally, but I don't think I've read all of Astro Boy, but it's known to be one of the best ones. And they took that one and remade it into Pluto, though it's one of those we changed a few things remake, because the original was it's still Astro Boy was still very action focused with like a lot of battle scenes and everything. I don't think the Pluto version it's more of a murder mystery. Because Billy Bat and Monster, that's the genre he's good at. He's not kind of the guy who draws robots throwing each other around.
No, but there are action scenes in it. It's just not like heavy action, I guess.
I mean, yeah, they kind of changed the tone away from because Astro Boy was still the that high adrenaline manga where explosions every few pages. Well, Pluto is a lot calmer in that. I don't remember if I've read all of Pluto, but I will say that I can say with certainty that Pluto didn't leave the impression on me that the greatest robot in the world did. But I would argue that, unfortunately, the Astro Boy does have that barrier of the visual style. If you can't get into that, you're missing out on a lot of good content. So it's, in that way, I guess it's nice to have it remade so it's more accessible to people. But Tezuka's stuff is just amazing, and it kind of almost feels a little sacrilegious to have it remade.
There's a lot of good Tezuka work that is out there.
Because they keep doing it. I read a version of Blackjack once, which was it was a remake, but it didn't feel as what's the word?
Authentic?
Yeah, no, as respectful. Because you have what's the name of the little girl that helps him out? Little funny girl
from Blackjack. I don't remember her name.
Well, anyway, there's her, and like one of the bad guys is a little girl as well. But in the remake version, they became very like, sexy kind of, or not. The way how they. That way manga sometimes draws little girls. That's like there's obviously a little too much detail in here.
Yeah, I know.
So they wanted to appeal to that kind of audience by making her one of those look at this beautiful child kind of characters.
Man, what you're describing is essentially the American system with this stuff, right? So they keep remaking Superman. If we look at what Superman was in the first 13 pages of his existence, it's very different from what it is now. And there's even one point where he had a mullet.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
There was the guy died at least once, and then there were like four different versions of him. And so they've done a lot with that character through various artists and writers, kind of rebranding and retelling stories and whatnot. And it's the same thing here. But I mean, if you look at the Tezuka Osamu work and you find great merit in its existence, then you're seeing something pure. You're seeing the vision of the artist. You're seeing what he intended. For the most part, I understand that he had to go through editor hell as well, but when you're looking at the remake of Blackjack or Pluto, you're looking at someone else's take on that work. And that's exactly what Superman has become. The original vision is now lost. The character's out of context. So they have to actually reinvent the character wholesale. And it's now just a facade. So at that point, the value of the character is very limited to me anyway. I would rather see a new property. I would rather see something original from the artist instead of.
But yeah, the point I was arguing there is exactly that, because Chris mentioned that like the way the Japanese comic world does it and the way the American comic world does it, and I was just pulling up some examples where I feel like they kind of do the same thing, the same like you said, Mulele.
let me be more like precise, because I don't want to point the finger at Japan versus America. I do think that is more of like a Western and Eastern kind of idealism, but let me scrap that and let me just say that there's two theories of making a story where you can go back and revamp it, or you can continue progressing it to make it better. Does that sound better?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay.
That
If
sounds
we're talking
more
about
understandable, yeah.
the original artist going back and redoing his own work, then that limits the scope quite a bit. But there are artists who do that, both in Japan and in the rest of the world. So I think that that's just a thing that every artist will decide on. And if you're much more of the moment, as Oscar said, like, you know, that was your headspace at that time, and you have to respect that, then that's the way you go. It's a personal choice, I think. But my original question to you, Chris, was more along the lines of, is there any time that you would look at your work and say, oh shit, I should have done this instead of that, because now I don't have a proper setup for the thing I want to say next? Especially when you're dealing with such a long series. I mean, with short stories and just a limited number of pages, and especially at the pace that you work at, I can see you tearing through an entire story and getting that down on paper, and actually having the ability to go back and edit things if you need to, relatively easily. But when you're dealing with a series of books, when the story gets so long, how do you handle that? Or do you not? Or do you have a very flexible style of storytelling?
I guess there are things that I do wish that I had done better. And one of them is, I guess, my phase of adventure hunting that I saw through other mediums like Indiana Jones and, if you know video games, Uncharted series or Lara Croft, where there's an artifact and the artifact helps you to do A, B, and C kind of a thing. I'm not the best when it comes to environments, when it comes to technology, when it comes to puzzles and things like this. So in that matter, yeah, there are some things I wish I had done better as a puzzle. But I'm going to make the next one better.
You mean that in a way as the stuff we talked about in a previous episode, like the hiding the little things that
No.
like
I mean,
details,
like, I mean, like a hurdle for the character to get through.
Okay.
Like, I'll just give you two examples that I'm gonna use. One that I did and that I regret and that I want to do better, but one that I'm going to do in the next series of comics for Relic Hunter Riven. Riven has a compass, basically. It's a compass that allows him to tell the moon's trajectory from the planet. But different locations where the moon is correlates to different language used by a certain race in the comic. What I had happen was, instead of doing this the right way, I used the actual relic, this compass, as a key to open a door. It was really stupid. Put the key in, door locks. Okay, now it opens. Yay. It's really stupid. I don't like how I did that. And I told myself,
you mean the compass is a physical key? As in,
yes, as a physical key.
Oh. That is a lot of build-up for...
Yeah, I don't like how I did that. So I promised myself, like, I'm going to use it as it's supposed to be used. Is going to help to, know the language. It's going to help to figure out how things are said or how things are done. It's going to help figure out the location for where this character is going to move, going to go. But I'm not going to use it as a literal key. So there, I've done something where I potentially messed up my story, but it's not a big enough detour where it's like I'm gonna scrap this entire chapter and redo it. I had an amazing like two chapter fight that led into like the next thing that I'm very happy about. So there are some things I didn't like there, but I'm leaving it. And in my next one, I went ahead and studied a unique game that's played in India. And this game I'm going to modify in order to create the next puzzle for Riven to overcome. And this is going to be good because it's going to introduce the lore of this hidden race. It's going to create a kind of obstacle, a physical obstacle for him. It's something that I can expand if I want to, or shorten. I can make it 1 episode or 2 episodes to kind of have like a setup and then a conclusion. And I planned it out much better. So I'm much happier with how this one is. And I learned that I need to do my puzzles better by making that first one so crappy as it was. So for me, I'm always going to look back at that and be like, this was crap, but the next one is going to be really good, kind of a thing. And just pray that people who have read it won't tuck out just because of it. Hoping that they will also be like, oh, this one wasn't that good. I hope the next one is better, kind of a thing. And they still want to be invested in it. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, very much. Sorry, Oscar, go ahead.
I'm sure. Yeah, no, I just wanted to say I'm sure that certain, well, not details, but like certain things you'd have to be a repeat. Well, for me personally, you'd have to be a repeat offender before I drop an entire series on something like that, you know.
Well, I mean, it's really hard to get people to read a story, so I don't know what would, what kind of people would drop it for what kind of reasons. If it's the story, if it's one of the characters, if one of the characters isn't taking center stage enough, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to be careful as to make it a good story and tell a good story. And I told the story as best as I could there. And from now on, all I have to do is make sure I keep telling myself, make sure I do my research, make sure I really plan this out, make sure this really works. And at the end of the day, I am still happy with what I put down on the page. I want to do it better than before. And I guess that's just the way that I do my storytelling is I'm going to make it the next one better if I'm not happy with it. If I have control of it in the moment to stop it and change it, like during the production, I will completely. But yeah, I did this one and it's not the best puzzle in the world, but I'm also not the best puzzle teller or puzzle maker in the world. I'm going to be better at it. I'm going to get better at it. And I'm hopefully going to have better puzzles for the characters to run into. So, yeah.
Have you ever seen the movie The Prestige?
Sounds familiar to me. Hold on. The Prestige.
Keep confusing it with this other magician movie they did. What's the other one again? Came out at the same time?
With Hugh Jackman?
Yeah.
I did not watch that one. I'm sorry. I gotta.
Hugh Jackman and what's his name? Batman. Christian Bale.
Christian Bale.
Is that the one with the rival magicians?
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that movie. I seem to remember.
That movie talks about the anatomy of a magic trick. And it tells you up front, this is what the magic trick is. and then it uses that anatomy of a magic trick as its template for telling a story. And so, and the story itself is actually quite engrossing, and there's some twists and turns in there, and some things that they do. It's like I can't imagine myself going to those lengths, just to do my thing. Mm-hmm. But hearing you talk about puzzles makes me think of that film, and actually, I think your stories would probably benefit a lot from the experience of watching it, or perhaps even studying it as a kind of way of presenting a puzzle.
Cool. I'll have to definitely check it out.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool movie on top of that. So.
Yeah, it is, and I believe David Bowie also has a cameo as Nikola Tesla.
Well, that's enough reason for me to rewatch it, I suppose.
Unless I'm confusing it with the other movie. I saw both of them around the same time, so.
Me too. But the other one wasn't that good, right?
Yeah, it wasn't as good. Yeah. Yeah, but anyway, The Prestige.
Okay. I will watch it. I'll try to check it out tomorrow then, and see if I can apply it to what I do. Thank you. Thanks for the recommendation.
Sure.
All right, then I pass the burning tiny wick on this candle over to Mulele then.
Okay, so the question is how I make my comics?
Yeah, let's go back to that one, I suppose. Wherever it goes from there. Yeah, how... Like, take us from the... There is not even the faintest idea of your comic. How do you go from there to printed book on the table, kind of?
Well, I'm such a narcissist that I'm just writing about myself. How's that?
I like it.
Yeah. Actually,
well, everyone does in a way, I suppose, but do go on.
Okay, well, basically everything that I see, everything I experience, everything I watch, whether it's movie or TV or people walking down the street, all of that is just input. And it does kind of come to a point where I'm making opinions and judgments on everything. Not in a negative or positive kind of way, but more of a like trying to understand what it is that I'm seeing. And as a way of kind of processing this stuff, it has a tendency to lend itself to a lot of the stories that I make. For example, Mind Gator. Originally, it's my little SF thing, based on three basic things. Number one, my love of Akira. Number two, my love of bicycles. And number three, my life experience living in Tokyo, which I also enjoy quite a bit. I do love the city, but yeah, these three things kind of came together, and several people that I knew at the time of creation appear in that comic. Some of them have smaller parts and some of them have larger parts. My mother is in the comic. My son is in the comic. Ex-girlfriends are in the comic. Just everything that was kind of happening in my life at the time is there. And with part one and part two, it kind of works together like that. Now, several years removed from that, I'm writing part three, or I should say I have written part three and part four, or at least I've outlined it. And it is now kind of in a slightly different context. But my philosophy on it is the first two parts start to ask a lot of questions, and the last two parts answer those questions. And so it is kind of okay that there is a kind of gap in the middle. Or at least for me as a creator. Maybe for the reader, not so happy, but and for the other comics that I'm currently working on, again, there are things that I saw, thought about, and other things that have kind of combined into different ideas and have developed over years. Pareidolia, which I talk about a lot on Instagram, Instagram and Twitter. That has been percolating in my mind for just over 25 years. And it started with an autopsy report of this woman who was found dead in her apartment with her head wrapped in duct tape. I might have told the story before, but I got a copy of this report from the medical examiner, trying to understand some of the phenomena about her death. Apparently, her skin had turned green underneath the duct tape, and they're trying to figure it out. And so I saw that kind of the fact that her skin turned green was not as important as the method of death. And it became kind of this mystery that I was working on. And I kept feeding it and feeding it and feeding it all these little ideas and observations and whatnot, till it has finally become this story of this woman's life and how she came to solve the mystery of this other woman's death. And but before I was ready to tell that story, I went back a couple of years and decided to tell the story of when that woman was a child and how this all kind of came to be. And so that's where I am.
If I can jump in here for just a second, man, I feel like, because I feel like part of the Pareidolia story is Yakai. Because you kind of, I feel like you jumped over that book, but you were saying how the stuff is about you. Yakai deserves a mention there, no? Because that book is literally you as the main character, based on your experiences. You want to?
Well, Yakai is much more of a documentary than anything that I created. All of it was basically as it happened. And I have a couple of opinions here and there placed in the book, and it's basically opinions that I had at the time of writing. Stuff that I heard from students are also involved in the book. Their understanding of things that I was telling them that happened to me during the course of the story kind of gave me a new perspective, and I added it to the book. Stuff about the spirit that followed me home, or the history of the neighborhood that we were in. All of that stuff is stuff that I heard or stuff that I researched, and it added to the story. But the core story itself is basically what happened. Whereas with Mindgator and Pareidolia, these are much more process heavy. I thought of an original plot to wrap up all of my observations in. It's not a documentary, but I mean they do fall so heavily on my interests that I would say it is kind of a narcissistic tangent. But yeah, like you said, that's what all writers do. But so once the story is kind of fleshed out in my mind to a certain degree, I'll put it on paper, usually using a word processor. Word is my processor of choice. I'm I'm used to it. And the only reason why I use Word is because I used to do it the way both of you, Oscar and Chris, write, is just to thumbnail it, get it on the page. 5 pages in, I'm redoing page 1. And I found that happened so much with me that if I don't write a script, I just kind of repeat myself forever. And I also look back at things that I've written and say, okay, but it's missing elements here. The setup isn't right because I didn't really understand story structure so much. And so for the past 2 years, 3 years, I've been kind of looking at story structure and trying to understand it. And I finally got a handle on it. I guess I'm kind of a slow learner, but I finally got a handle on story structure, and to a degree where I felt, okay, I can tell this story, and I can get all the things into the story that I want to get in. Some of them are a little more delicate, some of them are a little loose, but it will feel complete. And I feel that the outline that I've made is that. There's still space for me to ad lib or to go on tangents if I need, but basically all the pieces are there. All the pieces that must be there are there for the story to work, and that's what I wanted. It was a really solid structure because I wanted to be compelling in the beginning, and I wanted to be interesting in the middle, and I wanted to have something that it says, or something that it an emotion that it evokes at the end. So in that sense, I need a script, otherwise I can't pull that off. So once the script is or at least the outline is done, then I can start scripting the individual chapters, and that's kind of what I'm doing now. I've scripted the first 4 chapters, and I think there are 22, 23, 24 chapters of the book that I'm trying to write. But each chapter is quite short, so it's not a huge undertaking. It's like 120, 130 pages. But once I understood what I was trying to say with the piece and how I wanted to structure it, and what themes I wanted to play on, or what structures I wanted to play on, I feel comfortable enough to start putting it on paper. So I'm much more of the type to, okay, I drew the layout for 4 pages because each chapter is 4 pages. And I've defined the characters well enough that I feel comfortable drawing them. I have researched the backgrounds, the situations. I've got all the little details and whatnot sorted. So now let me jump in and actually draw this page. I draw the page, I ink the page, and I color the page. Then I go to page 2. And it's the same process. So exactly the process that you hate, Chris, is the process that I use. Oh no. I've got no qualms about our styles being different. I don't know that mine is the best way. I think my way may in fact be very inefficient. But here's the thing. Whatever I'm doing as kind of an experiment. I have to kind of feel that the painting or the page works visually, which means sometimes I'll draw it and then toss it, and then I'll redraw it and toss it. I
think on that count, there's something that you said that just kind of strokes wisdom, and it's something that I agree with you on. I think you said something. I'll keep drawing. I'll draw it until I can draw the character well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have that time where it's sometimes you look back at a character sketch from another sketchbook and you draw it again, and you're like, I'm not ready yet. But then you can open a sketchbook and then draw the character without needing to reference it from something else, and you're like, oh, okay, I know this character. I can like kind of bond with this character in a way. I'm ready to put this into a story.
Yeah, and often I'm wrong. And you'll see the characters start to morph and develop on the page. But I mean, to a certain extent, there's going to be that, and I'll come to a point where the first image in the book is going to be a very tight drawing, maybe even a little stiff. But by the time you get to the end of the book, the character will kind of come into its own. And oftentimes I feel, okay, I'm good with this. I'm comfortable with this representation of the character. I'm ready. Then I start drawing and realize that I was not ready, but I'm already in it, so I just go through. I found that with Mindgator. I found that with Pareidolia. I found that with Yakai. I'm drawing myself, but still, it's like, okay, this is the definitive Mulele. It's like, wait a minute, no, this one is the definitive Mulele. And then between the third chapter and fourth chapter of Yakai, I aged 10 years, so I redesigned myself to look much older. So there is a kind of progression of character that I'm trying to put into the comic sometimes, and that's all fine. I mean, the same character wearing the same outfit is kind of a standard thing for a lot of comic book artists, but I always kind of wonder about that.
I think it kind of, I'm thinking of JoJo again, honestly, whenever consistency comes up, I guess. But what I always found interesting about JoJo is the way he just rolls with things. There's this one character in the Stardust Crusader arc, a dog called Iggy, and he starts out as like really ugly small dog with like he's like a really asshole dog, and he's part of the good guys. But he's like just like a grumpy dog with superpowers, and throughout the story, it kind of, as the story continues, he kind of gets a little more heroic, and at a certain point, he has this little arc in his combat, and he looks completely different. He looks like a cute, like big eyes, cute dog fighting to save his friends or whatever. And they just rolled with it to the point that there's now separate merchandise for the two versions of him. You have him like in just ugly dog mode, and you have like his cute little hero mode, and they just roll with it. And it's like, yeah, it's the before after. This is when he was the asshole dog, and here's where he's like the hero guy. And I think a lot of that is just, as a creator, to not forget that it's your world. And if you're like, yeah, this is the way we are rolling, and if you just show that you're confident enough in that, people will generally, if you show that you're comfortable with it, you can get away with it more easily than people think, I believe.
Yeah, no, I can see that, and I agree to a certain extent. Personally, I don't read JoJo's Big Adventure because I absolutely hate the art style.
Yeah, it's hard to get into it sometimes.
I've heard it about a lot of stuff, like Dorohedoro as well is another series I like, and was it you, Mulele, that said like some people just tell me it's ugly, I can't get into it?
Yeah, I might have said that.
No, but I think I've heard it from someone else as well. Like they're very polarizing because they do have that weird style. But
I don't know those comics that well. Perhaps if I read the stories more deeply, I would like them a little bit more, and I could get into it. But for the most part, there's kind of a in Dorohedoro, there's a violence for violence sake kind of feeling to it that's kind of like, no. And for JoJo, it's just that art style is just so hard to read. It's so linear.
Personally, for JoJo, I always say I love JoJo, but I can only take it in like small amounts at a time.
Yeah, it's kind of kitsch.
Because mostly the story too, because it gets too much of a good thing a little quick if you like. I'd never recommend binging JoJo, especially the manga. Because maybe it's one of those few manga that really benefits from maybe reading it weekly. Because if you read it in a magazine, it's very strong. It jumps out immediately. But if you have like a big book with only that kind of style, it almost overpowers itself a little at times. But man, before I forget, I kind of wanted to ask you to get in the technical side of things on your side a little bit, because I know you do amazing things with rice paper and all of that. I keep calling it rice paper. It is washi, I suppose.
Yeah, washi.
But for people who are, maybe new to the podcast, new to hearing about how you work, can you maybe give us a run through of the more technical side of how you work there? Because I think you have a very interesting approach that differs to ours on that front.
Generally, I use a brush pen, a Japanese brush pen from Pilot Company, whatever they've got. And I ink on washi. It's actually hanshi. I'm not exactly sure what the difference is, but it's very thin paper, and it is it's thin enough that I can lay a sheet on top of another sheet where I've penciled and see the pencils very, very clearly. So I just ink on top of that. Bleeds like a motherfucker. And so I need a lot of control, and I need to be very careful and quick with the lines. Sometimes the bleeds are good. Sometimes the bleeds are very bad, and I have to edit them in Photoshop, or I have to just toss it and draw it again. But I mean, if I'm drawing like a full page on a piece of paper, I'm not going to toss the page. I'm going to edit. But a long time ago, when I first started drawing in this style, I really didn't know what I was doing, and I was so terrified of fucking up that I would do one brush stroke, and then, okay, that one's a perfect brush stroke. Okay, let me put it in Photoshop, and then I'd do another brush stroke, and I'd kind of piece them together to make one figure. And this is like 2007, 2006. When I first started experimenting with this stuff. And you can see a lot of that technique in my first book, Elvis, where, I mean, I would layer maybe 3 or 4 pieces of paper just to get one image, or maybe even one character. And it'd just be like black on black on black, and just pieces. And I found that I could control everything and make it very, correct, rather than, this is the page that I fucked up, or this is the character whose eye is off, but I couldn't edit it because whiteout doesn't work on washi. But it kind of developed into its own style. So I still kind of continue that thing, but now what I've done is I add layers of gray. Now, mind you, everything is drawn in black on a piece of paper and on the washi paper. But like the first layer will be just the outlines of the characters in solid blacks, like the basic black ink work for the comic page. I now draw full pages on one piece of paper rather than, an eye here or an arm there.
Confidence, yay.
Yeah, after, 15 years? But the next layers go into slightly different technique. I use a something called a suzuri, which is basically a stone, where I grind a bit of ink that has been kind of pressed into a stick. And I grind it with water, and it makes a muddy puddle of ink.
That's the same one used for calligraphy, right?
Yeah. Use it for calligraphy. I mean, most elementary school kids use this in Japan, and so you see it everywhere. It's in the supermarkets. It's at all the art stores, and it can go from very, very cheap. The ones for kids, like paintbrushes and paper and all, the whole set will be about $10, up to, well, sky's the limit, because they have I don't know.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
specialty paper and specialty ink and
brushes made from the virgin hairs of a baby's head. I don't know, but basically, I grabbed some of the cheapest stuff I could get, and brush-wise, I still only use like $5 for a set of 4 brushes, kind of stuff. I mean, I have bought some of the more expensive. You got to use a Winsor Newton Series 2 brush and all that bullshit, but I've really not felt any difference because I like a lot of X factor in my work anyway. But anyway, I use these cheap ass brushes, dip them in the ink, and then start doing washes. Of course, everything's planned and everything is kind of mapped out, and so I'm still like kind of inking over some pencil outline that I've made to kind of define the shape, and then I scan it in and attach it to the black ink. Although the black ink is black, and the next thing I scan is going to be gray, various levels of gray. And for one page, about 6 or 7 panels, I'll have up to 80 different layers. And I leave all of the layers active. I don't flatten anything, because I'm forever tweaking. I'm wanting to adjust this a little bit here and just this a little bit there, so it looks right, and then I'll move on to the next page, and then I'll, before I go to print, look at the entire thing and say, okay, I got to adjust some of these other things, because whatever was happening in my life at the time, these pages started to go a little dark, or these are a little too light, or whatever it was. So it's always adjustable, and then I flatten it, send it off. But I mean,
can I ask a question?
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Do you do the same thing with color as well?
Yeah, I do. Now, color, again, with Pareidolia, some of the color pages that I'm doing now are, they're going to be even heavier. But the gray tones, I tone down a lot. I don't need the gray tones as much because I'm doing color. So basically, I've got 1 layer of inks and 1 layer of gray tones, and then after that, I'm putting color. But there are a lot of effects. There's a lot of digital stuff in Pareidolia. So the color scenes will have about 10 layers per panel for color. And again, it's not flattened because I'm always editing. And this, particularly with the coloring style, it comes from the fact that I have absolutely no confidence in my coloring abilities. I'm just spitballing, and if it looks good to me, I say, okay, that one's set. And then I'm off to the next one.
How you feel?
Yeah. So it does get very, very labor intensive, and I would love to be able to do it in a different way. I'm rather uneducated when it comes to working in color and the different layers of gray tones in my black and white work.
As far as I've heard, those are the 2 big schools of coloring, or either stick to 1 layer or mostly 1 layer, or do everything in like a million layers, seem to be the main 2 paths you can take.
I'm a million layers guy, but I don't feel that the workflow is conducive to making comics. Maybe for like illustration or just one-off paintings, great. But for comics, I think it needs to be a little bit I don't know, quicker. But I think that's just me trying to be a perfectionist.
Yeah, I think there's a way to mess with stuff without splitting everything into layers, I suppose. But
there is, but I'm always very much about I want absolute control over every aspect of the color, and so.
If I may ask one more thing about your paper choice, though.
Yeah.
It's always intrigued me, honestly, and hearing you talk about it now, I'm not sure if I'm quite understand. If I want to say if I'm convinced on why you would choose to use this kind of paper, because it bleeds. It sounds difficult to work with.
Yeah.
You don't have to use a light box.
Nope.
That's a good thing, but it's kind of like you can probably get the most of the benefits you mentioned so far from using a light box. So what draws you to this very specific calligraphy kind of style?
I can't remember the name of the artist. He's actually a Japanese talent, as they call them. He basically was a comedian who switched to boxing, and then from boxing he switched to being a comedian again, and then he became an artist, a painter. And a lot of his early stuff was kind of interesting. It was this calligraphy brush style portraits of sardines and stuff like that. You just buy a fish, lay it on the counter, and paint it. And my first attempt at this style was influenced mainly by him and also by the guy who did Vagabond and some of the work in Vagabond, because he's doing a kind of a brush technique in the comic itself. I forget his full name. Inoue is his last name.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Vagabond, the manga.
Yeah, the manga is a samurai comic.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. So
Takehiko Inoue.
Yeah. So his style in comics and this other artist who was a boxer and talent, they influenced me to kind of pursue this style. And once I was going to go for like this traditional Japanese painting style, I was looking at sumie, and I was looking at kind of Chinese, well, I guess Chinese sumie as well, and thinking, okay, well, I gotta buy the brushes, I gotta buy the ink, I gotta buy the paper, and that was the paper that I happened to find, and so I made a comic using that paper, and it just stuck. And I've occasionally experimented with other types of paper, but if it doesn't bleed, I don't want it. I find the ink where the ink rests exactly where you place it. It's kind of waxy surfaces or ones that absorb in a very accurate pattern are just kind of boring, and the image kind of dies on the page for me. And I think it's more that I've adjusted myself to the paper so much that now that's the thing that looks right to me. Even though I'm sure there are people who will look at my work and say, "Man, the shit bled. All these different spots. What the fuck are you doing?" Like, no, man, that's the way it looks. That's the design of the character. Don't you understand? His left eye is supposed to bleed. Not in that way, but anyway, so I'm kind of using that style. I am starting to switch it up a little bit. So like Pareidolia, I wanted it to be very, very accurate in its line work. So I am switching to traditional comic paper for that. For that one. But I mean, that's another aspect of my work. Each project has its own MO where I kind of try new things and try to define the parameters of the project to kind of meet the theme. And so for this one, it's this way. Less bleeds, more crisp paper. Also, the shape of the comic is a perfect square. Stuff like that. But yeah, that's my process. Sorry. One last thing. I would say, final aspect to my comics is I love book design. I'm not great at it, but I love to tinker with it, and so I'm always changing the shape of the book, the dimensions, horizontal or portrait. I like a lot of that stuff. Yeah. Sorry, you're saying?
Oh no, I was just gonna jump in and say that I think it's definitely for all three of us. We are still experimenting and figuring things out with each book, which is part of the reason I think that these conversations we were always having were I think make an interesting format. That's kind of where this podcast was born out of, because we would come together and talk about how we do things and like how we're each experimenting with our own kind of stuff, and that's kind of what we wanted to share with everyone. That's a good non-introductory episode.
Yeah.
I think with that we can kind of wrap up. Do we want to do are you guys good on the topic of processes, or
yeah,
I'm starting to feel a bit tuckered out myself, but
well, actually there is one thing, just for the 5 or so people who are listening to the podcast. We do have an email address. What is it, Oscar?
Oh, it's TokyoComicAttack@gmail.com.
Yeah, it's all one word, no hyphens, no nothing.
No, nothing. All one word. All low caps. Everything's spelled normally.
Okay. So TokyoComicAttack@gmail.com. If you have questions about our technique or our styles or just any question for anything, absolutely do drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you.
Yes.
Definitely.
Yeah. It's always better as a conversation than as just us talking and you listening. But yeah, as far as that topic goes, yeah, I'm good.
Agreed. I'm on the same page. Sorry.
Originally, I wanted to take this our recommendation corners for this week's episode and go on this huge tangent about what is probably my favorite anime of all time, but we might have to keep that for the next episode. It is, of course, Neon Genesis Evangelion, and I've been rewatching it, and I have a lot of thoughts I want to share, but a little too much thoughts I feel for this one. But
it's all right.
If anyone else has like a quick little something they want to throw out there, something that's been keeping you interested this week, or
on my part, no. I did as you did. I think yesterday, no, 2 days ago, I binge watched all 3 Evangelion movies in a row, and was just overloaded.
They made them available for free. Those bastards.
Yeah, which brings
right
up great questions. I also posted it to you guys as well. They put Akira up somewhere as well for free.
I did do want to catch up on that. Not that it's not worth a rent, but that's 500 yen. It could stay in the pocket for now for YouTube. Though Akira is probably something that if you have a DVD collection or whatever, it probably should be in there. Haven't really been keeping up with getting movies on DVDs myself, but
for shame. Get the movies on DVD.
And I gotta say, I don't really watch anime. It's kind of for nerds.
well,
not gonna engage on that one.
No, I'm just kidding. I haven't watched Evangelion though. I don't know. All I know is that I'm missing something because everybody keeps talking about how good it is. I just don't know what it is.
Well, yeah. Once we get to the next episode, I really want to go into the nitty gritty of why I think you should give it a go. Maybe. Because I'm always of the opinion that if something doesn't speak to you, then just don't watch it. No harm, no foul, really. I do want to go back on a little something from last episode. Well, 2 things, I suppose, because thank you very much for that previous recommendation, Chris, because I think I lost easily an hour of my life watching Zach Morris's trash, and I don't think I've ever seen what was it, Saved by the Bell, but they format those little episodes very well, and time goes by way too fast.
Oh, and you just discover how much of an asshole that guy is.
He's trash. That's what he is.
Yeah.
That's some good stuff. Even if you don't know who Zach Morris is and what the hell it's all about. I went in not knowing anything, and I still had a good time. But Mulele, you mentioned that one show on Netflix I can't remember the name of. You didn't like, right? What was it down again?
Yeah.
Is it the one with the guy with the wizard hat from the creator of Adventure Time?
I don't know.
Right. Yes. What was it? Midnight something. It's
Midnight Gospel.
That's it. Midnight Gospel.
You watched that, right, Mulele? And you were like, stay away from it, or?
I watched the first 15 minutes of the first episode, and I was like, fuck this shit.
I didn't know what you were talking about, but I have seen clips of that. It looked really good, and I was looking it up a little, and people on the internet were like, one comment that stood out to me that I wanna share with everyone is some guy said, I just finished episode 7, immediately went to tell my brother that I loved him, and ended up crying on his shoulder. Or something like that, and like,
wow,
and everyone's like, yeah, it's that good. So
wow, that's different of opinion.
Not really a recommendation, but I kind of wanted to go back and make sure why you think it wasn't worth jumping into, but
hey, maybe I'm wrong. I often
I might go in there and give it more than 15 minutes if I can, and if I do, I'll try to come back on a podcast and let everyone know how it went.
If you find merit in it, let me know what it is, because I looked at that shit and goddamn, no, what the fuck is this? But the I never watched Adventure Time. I like the character design for a lot of it. What's the boy's name?
Finn.
And the dog?
Jake.
Yeah, Finn and Jake.
Are you gonna ask us what time it is next? Or?
No, I'm not. not falling for that. But I like the design of the characters, and I like some of the other artists that I've seen draw them. Mike Mignola did one recently, which is nice. But just I've never watched the show, and I didn't mind the designs for this show. And like the first 2 minutes of the show, I was like, oh, this looks kind of interesting. And then it just devolved into nonsense. And I was like, no, I'm not about this shit. So please enlighten me as to why it's.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to check in there and make sure I understood why to stay away. But I guess it's kind of a see for yourself.
Yeah, very much.
No, it's cool. I didn't really have anything else lined up that I have been specifically enjoying, I think. Chris, you had anything you want to throw in here, or?
Nothing major. Just if you have a chance, The Amazing World of Gumball will make you laugh. It's a good little cartoon television series from Cartoon Network, of course, but the character is so funny. Gumball and his little brother Darwin are very, very funny, and really good episodes at times. I do recommend it. But I'm also I've been kind of down myself, so I've been kind of jumping into comedy as much as I could, and I'm always a fan of bad jokes. So Def Comedy Jam does dad jokes, and if you ever want to just kind of laugh at some stupid comedy, watch their competition of dad jokes between their company's artists. They even have a episode where Samuel L. Jackson's on there doing dad jokes, and it's pretty funny.
Cool. All right, to round it off, I suppose we'll do our usual where can we find everyone. Maybe not always go in the same direction. Chris, you want to kick us off, and where can you find your comics?
Right. Let's go ahead and just do it like this. My name's Sketchbro. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Patreon. You can find me on Gumroad. And if you pledge even just $1, you will get the latest chapter of Duke and Tamara, which is a colored comic, as well as all the comics I produce right when they are finished, as well as being a part of the conversation. So please go to patreon.com/sketchfro or gumroad.com/sketchfro, or just search at Sketchfro in Google. You will find most things made by me. Have a conversation, read the comics, tell me what you think.
Sweet. Mulele?
Yeah, you can find me at Mulele Redux on most platforms, focusing mostly on Instagram and Patreon. Patreon, I'm putting up Paradolia, the comic that I talked about in my process, and I'm putting up everything there and explaining it and talking about it at length. And then maybe about half a week later, I'll be putting up bits and pieces of it to Instagram and Twitter. But I'm not entirely sure what is going to happen with the comic. But for right now, the writing process and the drawing process, I'm documenting very heavily on Patreon. So follow me there if you can. Yeah, that's it, I think. Oscar?
You can find me under Big Fat Dog Comics. You can find me on Instagram. I also do this really cool podcast that, oh wait, you're listening to it. I made a Patreon because, I felt left out. So I do Patreon now. So you can give me $1. I don't really give anything in return, and that gets me 60 cents. So work in progress. But honestly, as a call to action, if you want to reach out to any of my social media or whatever, and you have anything you'd be interested in a Patreon, I'll put more work into that myself. But if there's anything that people would like on that Patreon, feel free to let me know. But it's there as a placeholder mostly for now. Other than that, you can find some of my stuff on Gumroad, available for free or whatever you want to pay for it. And other than that, most of my comics, my recent stuff, I've been trying to post it on Instagram. So I've been trying to keep that very comic heavy and not a lot of illustrations or anything. But yeah, find me there. So that's Big Fat Dog Comics for me, Mulele Redux, and Sketchrow. And that's it. You have been comic attacked, and we'll hopefully see you again next week when we'll do the big anime nerd episode. Hopefully.
Get ready for the nerd out.
Yeah. Until then.
All right. Deuces.